Hello, good morning, and welcome to today's Honkference. I'm here with the publishing panel, Does Size Matter, which is going to be chaired by Maurice Lyon, and I'm just going to let them get on with it. I'm not going to introduce the representatives from the publishers, I'm going to let them do that for themselves. I just want to do a small bit of housekeeping, remind you to put your questions in the Ask a Question function thing at the bottom, or go in there and see what questions have already been asked, and you can vote to prioritise those when it comes to the question and answer section, and also to remind you that we are supporting the work of Seven Stories and their fabulous archive of children's literature and all the work they do encouraging reading and literacy around the country, and especially in the northeast. So if you can donate, the button to do that is also along the bottom of your screen. So with no more ado, I shall leave it to you, Maurice.
Thank you. Great, thanks very much, Jane. I'm Maurice Lyon. I think some of you may know me from my work with Golden Egg and the Academy in the past, but I'm essentially a freelance editor, have worked in the business for many years and all over the place, and so I'm absolutely delighted to be able to bring together a panel of hugely experienced editors, currently working in companies of different sizes, but actually all three, I think, have experience across the full range of children's publishers. We're representing a small independent startup company, a medium and very successful independent specialist children, just celebrating 10 years, and finally, more of a corporate publisher with a full range of publishing interests and imprints, of which children's fiction is one's very successful part. So I hope that we will be able to provide a variety of insights into the business of publishing. So I'll ask each of the panelists briefly to introduce themselves, say a little bit about what they're currently doing, and ask that perhaps they give a little reflection initially on their take on what does size matter from a publishing point of view. So Bella, may I ask you to start?
Absolutely. So hello everyone, I'm Bella Pearson. I will know some of you because I used to work for Golden Egg many moons ago, and I am the publisher at Guppy Books, which has been going, I set it up in 2019, at the end of 2019, and we published our first book, that's right, at the end of 2019, and launched properly into 2020, which of course was not ideal timing. And before that, just to give a little background, I was at David Fickling Books for 17 years in a variety of guises, of editorial guises, and also did some freelance work in that period with some bigger publishers such as Puffin and Chicken House, among others. And also at Golden Egg, I worked for many years, which was just wonderful. And does size matter? I mean, I'm going to say no. Size does not matter. Being small has many, many benefits, as well as with the large publishers. So that's my take on it, and I'm sure I'll talk about that further.
Thank you. Okay, Kirsty, may you like to go next?
Yes, hello. I'm Kirsty Stansfield. I'm the head of fiction at Nosy Crow, which, as Maurice has just said, we're celebrating our 10th anniversary, which I can't quite believe, actually. I find it astonishing. I don't know where those 10 years have gone, and I am considerably grayer, I think, than I was when I started. So we are, yes, medium-sized. We started out as a small startup, and now we have reached medium-sized by a process of kind of mushrooming every 2 or 3 years. And I suppose I sit in the middle of this size matters issue, and I would say that I've worked at, I've been in publishing for horribly long time, over 20 years. I started as a literary agent's assistant. I've moved to Scholastic Children's Books. I stayed for probably about 14, 15 years, and then I went to Hachette for a while, then I freelanced for a bit, and now I work at Nosy Crow. So I sort of had an experience of all sorts of different aspects of editing for different size companies. I think size matters, but I mean, and someone's going to have to say this, aren't they? So I might as well be me. It's sort of what you do with it that really counts.
Excellent, thank you. And Emma.
Hello everybody, my name's Emma Matthewson and I am currently executive publisher at Bonnier Publishing, Bonnier Books, but I head up the Hotkey Books and Piccadilly Press imprints, which are two of the children's imprints at Bonnier. I have worked at all different size publishers actually. My very first job was editorial secretary at company called Blackie Children's Books, which was an independent Scottish-based company. And then I moved on to, actually Blackie was bought by Penguin. So I was catapulted into Penguin, so from one very small to one very large company. And then I moved from Penguin on to Bloomsbury, where I stayed for many years, over 15 years. And then I moved to Bonnier, which is obviously a bigger company, but it was actually to join the newly formed Hotkey Books, which is a teen and YA imprint. Does size matter? I think from an author's perspective, I think what matters most actually is what you feel your editor can do for you within that company. Because I think at different stages of your writing career, that will always be the key thing for you. So I think it's a sort of separate question as part of the whole.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Perhaps we could just explore a little bit more. I mean, that was very interesting, Emma, about you know, the relationship the author has with the editor, and whether your role as editor within the publishing company can enhance that or indeed make it more difficult. I'm just thinking particularly of the I suppose the acquisition process. I mean, you know, how that varies from company to company. I think anyway, yeah. So I suppose my question is, as Kirsty said, you know, what do you do with the size that you have, and how you go about ensuring that the author that you acquire is as fully involved as possible. And I wonder if, Emma, perhaps you could address that in the first instance. You know, as I think it's there's a, I'm waffling on a bit, but there's a bit of a conception that larger publishers, authors can get lost, can get ignored, can get confused about, you know, who they're dealing with and who's making the decisions. So I think, as I say,
yes, I think that's definitely it can be harder with a bigger publisher. Where the bigger publisher might have, in theory, more clout, more resources, perhaps, but it can also be harder to be the bigger fish, because obviously you are one amongst many, and that's what I think why I will always go back to the role of the editor in championing you, because as your editor, well, my view is that as an editor, you are championing your author, and that means, and I'm sure you want to explore this a bit more, Maurice, but the role of the editor is not just the very important and primary work of working on the script with the author and making it as together collaboratively is wonderful as it can be, but it's also, I mean, I would say almost 50% of your role, in addition to that, is championing you as the author to the rest of the company, from the very level of taking it to your book to acquisition, to ensuring that the whole team, sales, marketing, publicity teams, are always keep your book in their forefront, you know, giving ideas for sort of good promotions or, you know, good avenues. It's an ongoing conversation which is outside of the actual text of the book.
Absolutely. No, that's very good, Emma. Thank you. Bella, presumably you have a lot fewer of those sorts of
Well,
issues.
I do, yeah. But that's interesting. But we're doing the same thing, because
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily championing to teams behind, the scenes who are working away in publicity and sales. But I'm having to do that myself to the outside world, as well as, the rest of the team that I have here. So we're doing the same job, but in a slightly different, more outward facing way. And, obviously with fewer resources, I don't have big departments who are working away in publicity and marketing. I have a freelance person doing marketing, freelance person doing publicity, occasionally a few more. So I don't have that championing inside the company, but it's certainly harder work to champion that outside the company and to the outside world. But it's a similar job. I mean, as Emma was saying that, I was like, yes, that's exactly, that is at least 50% of my time is doing that, but not necessarily to those people who then take on the mantle and go on their way.
Yes, absolutely. Kirsty, I'm just thinking that over the 10 years that Nosy Crow's been going, I mean, the company must have evolved enormously, and whether how you've experienced the transition, perhaps from a sort of small startup like Bella's operation to a company now that you employs 50 odd people roughly, and has a reach across the world in terms of markets and so on. And how's your role as an editor changed in that period?
I mean, I think Emma's right. You do the same thing wherever you are. I mean, I think throughout my career, I've always championed authors. Editors always have to do that. They're kind of the representative of the author in-house. And it's a question of how many people you have to speak to, I suppose, and how many people you have to keep having that conversation with to keep things going. When I remember the glory days of signing authors when Nosy Crow was tiny, and I'd have a conversation with Kate Wilson, who set the company up, and she'd read it. I remember having one meeting with one of the authors who with Helen Peters, who we publish now. She came in, we had a great chat about her book. We talked about what we'd want to do with it. Kate talked about the brand, and her, Kate comes from a rights background. We only buy world rights, so she was explaining all of that. And then by the time she'd left, we just said, I think this is going to be brilliant, but let's make her an offer. And she had that waiting in her inbox when she got home. And that, for me, as somebody coming from a corporate situation, was so refreshing, because all the jobs are done. But I mean, that can't last forever, obviously. And as we got bigger, there are more people involved. But I still think the process is the same. You are still getting consensus on why you want to publish something, and you're not just saying, it's a lovely book, I love it, the writing is marvelous. You are saying, we could sell this in France, there's a great American opportunity here, make a brilliant film. You're representing the author, but you are putting a commercial spin on it, and that is the editor's role. You have to be commercially aware, but love the thing that you're trying to sell, and the more people you convince, the more that will last the book through the process, and the author needs to be able to trust you. And it's really important, I think we'd all agree with this, that before you sign up with anyone, you need your editor, because that relationship is the one that has to work on both sides, obviously. And so our acquisition process, I mean, I don't miss the big forms I used to have to fill in and the row of 35 salespeople that I had to talk to about a book. I can't say that I do miss that, but the process is the same. They say the same things. It's just there are fewer people to convince, I suppose. And you do have a sense that, I think, if you've got a big, there are many advantages to big companies too, in terms of, the number of hands that can be on that book. But I think if you are convincing people, and you've convinced them early on, and they're the same people who will be taking that book out to market, and there's not too many links in that chain, that can be quite a good thing, I think. Just saves you saying something over. I suppose.
Great. You touched on a very important point that I think people often don't fully appreciate, and in fact I think Emma, you've also touched on it, that there's more to it than just liking a book as an editor. When you're thinking about acquiring it, you've actually got to think in terms of market. And I wonder whether perhaps we can just explore a little bit of, I mean, we're always getting asked, you know, as editors, what we're looking for in terms of acquisitions, and I just wonder whether we can explore a little bit of the kind of thought processes that go into it. Perhaps Emma, I don't know if you'd like to kick off and just, as I say, it's not just, you know, having a wonderful book, you know, and being passionate about the book. It's actually thinking about, you know, who's going to buy it, you know, how are you going to get it to market, and those sorts of things, isn't it?
Definitely. I mean, my sort of very broad brush response is we're always looking for voice, and that's, you know, that's very subjective, and that's the love part, I suppose. But then I think quickly followed by that is, and this is unique to children's books, is the audience and the age range of the audience. And that can actually, if it's muddled, or if you are not clear as the editor, so you can't inform the sales team, for example, who this book is for, then it gets quite muddled, and I think a book can fail often. So whether it's 5 to 8 or 9 to 12, or does it cross both? But in that case, how are you planning to get these books to both audiences? And that then informs the cover direction, and that informs how you talk about the book. If you're going older, is it teen or is it YA, or is it both? But if it's both, how are you going to make sure that you reach both audiences? Are you going to have 2 separate campaigns, or are you going to prefer one over the other? And I mean, famously, I think for you as an author, I think you should write what you want to write. Don't necessarily try and put yourself into a box. I'm going to write for 5 to 8, and this is what I want. This is what I'm going to do, and how many words do I need to write for that 5 to 8-year-old? I mean, famously, an author that I worked with for J.K. Rowling did not know specifically who she was writing for. She did not have, in terms of a child audience, she told me that I was writing, she wanted to write what she would have liked to have read. That's not going to work for everybody, but she actually allowed us as the publisher to direct where it was going to be pitched to, targeted at. So I think even if you as the author are not necessarily, you might be aware, and that's brilliant and that's fine, but if you're not, it's not a worry either, because your publisher will have the knowledge and experience to position it to the right audience for the book, which hopefully you'll be on board with as well. I mean, that's a conversation to have at the very beginning of, you know, at the time of when you're discussing the project.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Kirsty, given, I mean, you commented that you know, Nosy Crow only buys world rights, or only in all the books, which is obviously a challenge for publishers, given most agents are very reluctant to hand over world rights to a publisher. How do you see that process of evaluating a proposal or a manuscript?
Well, I think, you know, when Nosy Crow started, there was a very clear vision, and I was told this very clear vision for what we were looking for. And we don't do, just to go back to your sort of more general question first about the acquisition process, we don't publish teen books. We publish up to 12, and the brand is very much it's very family friendly, which is why we don't do teen, because of course the point of teen is not to be parent pleasing. And I miss those days. But so I think we felt very early on that we wanted to have, but the brand would be such that teachers, librarians, booksellers, parents could trust it, so that they would know that if they've read one Nosy Crow book and the quality was excellent and the story was great and the writing was brilliant, they would know that would be the same for all of those books. And once you start to think like that, and you think about what Nosy Crow represents, and it doesn't mean that the books have to be safe and they can't deal with difficult subjects. It's just that there probably isn't random swearing, or you want to make sure all the routes to market are as open as possible. So let's not put those clubs and fairs off. Let's not put primary school teachers off by just having a bit of effing and jeffing, for the sake of it. So that kind of starts to sort of inform everything that you when you read everything, you have all that little checklist in your head. And the other part of it is you have the global reach. And it doesn't mean that we wouldn't publish, we don't just go, I'm sorry, this isn't going to sell in 14 territories, so we're not going to publish it. It's not that rigid, but we do discuss how far we think the book will travel. And it's not so much, it's about knowing what we're doing with it. It's about that vision, I think. So we could publish something that we know isn't going to work globally. We still get world rights and we still try really hard, but our expectations are that it will be a Waterstones book, or it might be something that teachers particularly get behind. And I think what you're thinking about acquisitions is conveying an enthusiasm and a love for something, but also a vision for it. And that's what publishers offer that authors may not even, they don't, like I think Emma said, they don't always know who they're writing for, but you really, really need your publisher to know who they're publishing for. And that's the link. You can take your book and say, it's for 5-year-olds, and your publisher needs to be able to say to you quite clearly, this is not for 4-year-olds, this is for 10-year-olds, and we'd mark it as we'd aim for book a month, or we would try to get it into the clubs and fairs. It's about, that's the sort of, and that's things I think that people don't necessarily think editors do. I think they think that we just sit there and, I'm so in love with this. But it's you have to know every single aspect of the business, I think, in order to be a good editor.
Interesting, yes.
Bella,
I'm wondering, what's the thought processes for you? Do you have a sense of what Guppy Books is? What is a Guppy book?
Yeah, well, I mean, basically, when I set it up, the idea was is to publish fiction for children between 5 and 18, and to publish a very eclectic list of books that I think are really fabulous books, but for anybody and everybody. I'm not saying everyone's going to love all these books, but that somebody will come and find something that they really love. And I wanted to do not only the issue of rights here is quite interesting, because what I also wanted to do, because it's just me with freelancers with support, but I'm the only full-time editor and I'm the only editorial commissioner at the moment. What I'm doing is also buying books which don't have, which have only UK, Commonwealth or UK rights, so that the bigger publishers, I think, have, that definitely in the last 10 years or so are less inclined to buy books that don't have world rights. And so there were books out there, and one of the authors, for example, is Sharon Creech, who is, Carnegie winning author, and her books, her most recent books, weren't being published by anybody because they're published in America, because she's an American author. So I, saw these and thought how, they are wonderful. She's the most wonderful writer. So I now publish Sharon, and that's all her latest books. And so that for me is incredible to have an author of her caliber on the list. And also Jacqueline Moriarty, who's an Australian author. Her books weren't taken up in this country, and they've done really, really well. So from that point of view, for a small publisher, I think that's been it's actually been better than I thought. It's been a really fabulous experience. And then obviously the rest are all originated in the UK, and on the whole, I have world rights there. And what I look for are unusual, original. I mean, obviously I have to love them, but I have to know that the children who I will be selling to and the markets I'll be selling to will love them as well. And I have enough experience, I think, in the last 20 years or so in publishing in bigger companies. And when I was at David Fickling Books for a long time, he was with Random House children's books, and so obviously I had that backdrop, and we were heavily affected. So yes, I mean, when when you say what do I look for, it's just me. So it is very much, I don't have anyone to talk to, and I love that. I mean, I'm a bit of a control freak, I think, because I love it so much. The fact that I can just say I love this, yes, we're going to publish it, and we're going to make this fantastic. But it's because I see something in it that I think is commercial or commercial. I love the book. I think it's really funny. People, 8-year-olds are going to love this. Or we're doing a really wicked series called Ghost Scouts, which is really slightly maverick, and it's just had a review saying, it's a breath of fresh air for children. This is not playing it safe, but they're books that when you get them into children's hands, they absolutely love them. So I mean, I think I have that freedom, but again, it has to be profitable. You cannot run a business unless the books are profitable. So that is always in my mind as well. It's not just a passion project where I'm going to publish something that I don't think is going to sell. I mean, all these books I'm convinced will be successful in their own way.
In a way, it sounds as though, it sounds as though in some ways you're kind of spotting niches or pockets of the market that perhaps aren't being addressed or reached by other publishers. Is that what you think it is?
Yeah.
You mentioned Sharon Creech, who was probably never a mass market author, but
she was
hugely well loved and highly respected.
Educational, librarians, and there are so many people who know her from 20 years ago, and obviously she won the Carnegie Medal here. But another example is a book that's coming out next March, which is a book by Julian Sedgwick, which we're publishing, which is also Julian Sedgwick, and it's got manga in it by Chia Kutsuwada. And when I first met Julian and he showed me the book, all the manga he'd written out in prose, and he'd been to other publishers with this. And I said, why are you not thinking the manga would be manga? Why is it written out? And he said, well, he'd been told by a bigger publisher, I don't know who, that it would be too expensive to put the manga in, and it wasn't feasible to do. And it's not. I mean, if you can make it work, if you make the book in the right way. And it was the book wouldn't have worked if the manga wasn't manga, if it was just written. So it's things like that. I mean, I feel incredibly lucky and fortunate to have that project. It's such an exciting new way of telling a story. Different. It's not new, but it's a different way of telling a story. So yes, I think in that way I can jump in. A small company, not just Guppy, but smaller companies can jump in and do something a bit different, more differently in that situation.
Great, thank you. Emma, do you think, I mean, obviously cost that's been alluded to there is a big issue, and obviously a book that's going to cost more to produce, by having a lot of illustration, needs bigger sales. Is that something that you find a challenge, trying to do something a bit different, like the Julian Sedgwick that Bella has been talking about?
I think it means you think more carefully about format. So I think that if you were going to do it, and we do love doing some very beautiful one-off books as well, and I think one might consider a hardback format more carefully, because for both the publisher and for author, if you get the sales from a hardback, everyone makes more money and more revenue from it. Everyone is very happy. The last thing you want to do is publish a beautiful book that doesn't sell. And it's just such a horrid waste and heartbreaking waste of everyone's time, love, care, and attention. So I think I don't think it's a problem. I think it's if I were to come across a project that required some stunning illustration and some stunning art, and I loved it and could see a way forward for it, I would be moving heaven and earth to break a few rules, break a few boundaries to make sure that it happens. And that's where some of the best-selling and gorgeous publishing has happened. I think winners of the Kate Greenaway, particularly in the fiction side, have been groundbreaking in stunning pieces of art included in fiction. I mean, if we're talking younger, the young and picture books and colour, then it's different again. But I think and that's definitely more expensive, rightly so, because the colour contribution from the artist is a significant, the most important in lots of ways. But then, as Kirsty would no doubt say, you need world rights, and not many people, not many publishers would be publishing picture books or creating original picture books without having the ability to sell worldwide, to be able to recoup printing costs, let alone the other costs.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Kirsty, I mean, what's your view on on publishing perhaps difficult books in the sense of formats or breaking boundaries? I get the sense that often from most publishers it's a question of having the set format of a B format paperback for fiction, for younger fiction, with a modest number of black and white illustrations, and those are formats that work. We know their cost, but had obviously some of the best publishing, as Emma's alluded to, goes beyond that. How do you navigate that, as it were, that sort of conundrum?
I think it's interesting. Emma was talking, I was trying to think about how many hardback fiction titles we'd published, and I think it's like 4. I mean, it's a very small number, and I think we always see the format as being something if you publish something in hardback, it's true, and then it's got a greater chance of maybe being picked up by reviewers or shortlisted for awards. I think, although that may not be as true as it used to be, if it doesn't work, it's paperback is all over for the paperback. So it depends on the glass half full, half empty, doesn't it? If you see it as 2 bites of the same cherry, or a bit too risky. And I think we've never had a project, it's not we wouldn't ever do it, but we've never had a project where we thought, this format needs throwing out the window and starting again, and we could do it like this. And that's not that we wouldn't do it, it's just that we've never had anything that we felt it could cope with that level of deviation. It's just, I think it's more, I'm talking about fiction now. I think in our book,
absolutely,
we're much more intrepid, and I think lots of novelty formats are amazing and groundbreaking, and they do, they do really well. But they have a greater global reach, I think. So in fiction, I think we're quite cautious, but it's not that we wouldn't. We just haven't yet.
Yeah. Found the right project to require that. I'm very conscious that as we've been talking, we're talking a lot about a lot of things that are not directly involved in the structure of a novel, or the line editing that we get involved in, or even indeed the specific genres or styles of fiction that we're looking for, and I think that's really interesting, because I suspect that a lot of people outside publishing think that's really what we're well, it is what we're very interested in, but it's also there are a lot of other factors that need to be involved. I'm very conscious the time is moving on, and we've got a load of questions coming up. I think perhaps if we start taking some questions. So I'm just going to see what's there. I mean, somebody's asked, what does your press look for in a submission? I think we've already covered that to some extent. With so much talent out there, do publishers really have time to even read submissions from self-published unknown authors with the risks attached? Bella, would you like to take that one?
I mean, for me, unfortunately, I just don't have the time to read through the year. I don't have time to read unsolicited manuscripts that come without an agent, because it's just me, and I already get hundreds from agents. So what I have been doing is an open submissions competition. I did one last year. I'm going to do one this year. I'm going to hopefully run one every year, where over a week, and I'll obviously announce it earlier, but over a week people will be able to submit, and that is for unagented people from all over the world. And last year we did a young adult competition, and it was fantastic. And I have publishing in July the most fantastic young adult novel by a Malaysian student who's living in London at the moment, studying. And she's an incredible writer. That's incredible. And that was from this competition. And I had 360 submissions. And we got through those, and that was a way to do it because it was controllable. I couldn't do it in my day-to-day publishing life. I'm too small, and even at David Fickling Books, we did look, but it was a lot of work. It was a hard, there are lots and lots of books to get through, let alone unsolicited. So I think that for me is certainly the best way to manage and control that, and it still gives the opportunity for people to send them to me and for me to see them. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah. Kirsty, I mean, I think we can all agree submissions and dealing with submissions is probably the one of the biggest challenges that as editors that we face. But how do you go about it? How do you manage to prioritize looking at it?
Submissions, unsolicited submissions or agented or both?
Well, both. The question was really, how an unpublished author can get seen by you, I suppose.
Yeah, well, we did when we first started. We had open submissions and we read everything. But as soon as you start, I mean, I think another aspect of the editor's role is how much time you actually spend on the authors you've got versus how much time you spend looking for. So back in the day, we didn't have any authors. So obviously we had loads of time to read unsolicited, and we found at least two projects and authors that way. But once we had them and we're working on those books and we're working with those authors and seeing where they might go, what they're going to write next. It's not just about the book they're working on, it's the one after that, and so on and so forth. You can't then abandon them while you go and look for other people on it, and especially in an unsolicited situation where you get so much. So we had to close, unfortunately, to submissions and focus on agent, and we get enough of those. Honestly, it's a bit overwhelming, really, particularly the moment. I don't know. So it's a constant juggle. And you do have to, but I mean, I think I probably spent, 80% of my time is on the authors we've got. We've got a lot of authors now, and it's not fair to say, come be published by us, and then, oh, by the way, I can't talk to you now. I'm looking at my submissions. I need people like you. It's, it's a.
Yeah. I think that's a hugely important point, and I'm sure Emma would agree with that. So much of your time is taken up with the authors you're already committed to, and Emma.
No, definitely. That's it's your authors are your lifeblood, the authors you already have. So that's who you want to be looking after. In terms of submissions, it's increasingly difficult, I have to say, to manage, I think, and I don't know. This last year, a lot of authors there's been given a lot of time for a lot of people to write, and I have found these submissions have been absolutely overwhelming. And this is even from agents only, and we don't particularly have an open submissions policy, and we do generally only accept submissions from agents, partly because there is so many from that route, but that is something that I do want to broaden our reach, because I think that isn't, in a way, that's a sort of narrowing of submission, if you like. So I think the open submissions limited, as Bella was talking about, is an excellent route. So I just think in some ways, I think for aspiring writers, in many ways, that it is either looking for open submissions or finding an agent. And I know that's just as hard as anything else, because agents are also, very, need to select their authors very carefully too. So yes, I mean, look, considering submissions is one of those odd things. As Kirsty said, it's that very difficult balancing act between looking after and supporting the authors you already have, whilst also with an eye to the future for your future publishing. But you have to look after your existing authors.
Yes. I mean, it's an interesting question, isn't it, about supporting existing authors? Because I mean, isn't it true that that it takes more than one or two books to usually to establish an author, and that it's really only the ongoing publishing of an author over a number of books and over a number of years that really builds their readership. Would that be true, you think? Sorry, I don't know who to ask. Kirsty, that's, I mean, you
I think it's, well, I think I've noticed over the years that you actually have less time now to get something right. So although I think the difference between being published and unpublished for an author is the confidence that it brings. So, you know, your first book is something that you may have worked on for, I don't know, for a really long time, and you are letting it out into the open, and it's all very stressful. Once you know somebody likes it, it's published. That kind of, I think, changes how you write. I mean, it brings its own, your second book brings its own difficulties because you are then working to a contract and deadlines that you may not be used to. So it's all, you know, it's a very different experience, I think. But from a publishing point of view, you know, I remember when we launched a series at Scholastic and we gave it 12 books before we decided, oh, I think actually the covers aren't right, will we launch it? I mean, who relaunches books when it, you know, now after 12, it's unbelievable. And it went on to be very successful. But I mean, it's now I think you have that. If that first book doesn't hit the ground, I'm really trying not to be negative. I feel I've been negative about submissions and now I'm being negative about publishing in general. But there's so many books being published. There are so many more books being published, and there seems to be, I don't know, it just seems like you've really got to hit the spot with that first book, and from a publishing perspective, and then it can be quite difficult after that to reposition somebody. So that's why I think we spend so long with authors, because you need to have some sense of what the next book's going to be, talk about that at the same time. You're presenting not just a book, you're presenting a career and an author to the market. And so you want to say, this is the first one, but look, this is the second one. This is our plan. This is our vision. And I feel that's sort of different from how it used to be. I don't know if anyone else agrees with that, but it feels very, you know, you've got to have all your marketing material in place. You've got to have everything ready. You can't just, it's quite stressful. Maybe I'm just having a stressful week. I don't know.
Bella, I mean, does that ring true for you?
Yes and no. I mean, I think I could let that ring true in a way, because I'm taking on very few authors really, and I'm investing in them, and I can't see it as if the first one doesn't hit, you know, if it doesn't hit the road, you know, the running. I mean, we've had, for example, the first book I published was Louisa Reed's Gloves Off, and that's had incredible reviews. That was Sunday Book of the Week. It's had an amazing time in reviews, but because of the pandemic, the sales haven't reflected that. And her next book came out again. It was in the pandemic, and it was at the end of last year. Again, the sales haven't reflected the critical acclaim it's had, the marketing we put behind it. We're going to continue this year plugging away, making sure it gets out there, that people get to read it and see it, because I think it's a slightly different, I'm slightly segueing off the subject, but in a way
that's great.
That's what we're doing, is I'm not letting those two books go. I mean, she's a phenomenal writer. They're going to have a life, and they're going to make sure that we're going to put things in place that keep it going. It's not just about publication. It's about her, as Kirsty said, it's about her as an author. So I'm going to, you know, that's what we're doing as a small publisher, is I believe 100% in all of these books, and I'm going to make sure, you know, maybe in 10 years time I'll be looking back and thinking, well, I failed at that, but I'm going to make sure that they all get the space and get seen and heard. I mean, it has, obviously the pandemic has completely wrecked some things, but
Yes.
for everybody.
Can I just chip in there? I don't want to make it sound like we just go publish one book and then run away screaming if it
No,
hasn't.
I know that's what you were saying.
We're in it for the long haul. It's just that we don't have that luxury of waiting for someone's third book to be the breakthrough. I mean, you do and you don't, but it just, that was my point. Not that we.
Yeah. Emma, I mean, you know, sort of sticking with an author in the way that Bella has described. Do you think that in your current situation you're able to do that to the same degree, or would you have to do it differently? How, or is it like more like Kirsty? You know, you're having to kind of make the first book work, or that, you know, pretty much from the off, because you've got more people to get behind it as well, haven't you? Yes,
that's true. I think, oddly enough, and I know this is going to sound odd, if as an author you've managed to get a huge advance for your first book, you know, one of these stories that you hear, you know, and massive advance for first book, and that first book fails or doesn't sell as well as the high advance warrants, which is not the same thing, because it could have still sold well. That almost puts you into a harder position for book 2 or 3, because the expectation was not achieved, even if it might have been a little bit unrealistic, because it came that high advance came through an auction situation, and therefore you're actually paying more than. It's wonderful for the author, don't get me wrong, but you actually paid more than you might have done or willingly have done. And I think that's harder to then go on for the next book if the publishers put in a lot of money in terms of advance and hopefully support, marketing, publicity, etc., editorial time, of course. If the first book was a more modest sum and it didn't do so well, but the next book idea is brilliant, you're almost in a better position. And there's something about advance, and I'm sorry, I'm segueing again, Maurice, but there's something about advances and pay. Everyone needs to be paid a proper amount, a fair amount, fair advance. But I think there is a balance to be a balance to be made between the really relatively small percentage of those very high advances, which I think can actually do those people who've received a high advance for a first book, which hasn't sold as well, and that makes it harder for the next book. I think if you've got a more even, sort of fairer in a way, or to all parties, then it's easier to have make a mistake but then pick back up and move on.
Yeah. No, good point. Thank you. That's brilliant. Another question that's come up that I thought would be interesting: how can authors best help publishers take a book to market? Again, maybe we could start with you, Bella. You know, I mean, you must be working obviously very closely with your authors. Have you got any tips for authors about thinking?
Well, I think it's difficult. I mean, I have to say all the Guppy authors are incredibly. All of them, without fail, are incredibly supportive of one another. So that is hugely beneficial, because everyone is boosting everybody. But and they're all very good at the outward facing, talking to you know, the things on social media, but talking out to schools and libraries and being very proactive and enthusiastic, even if they haven't done it before. But as I'm saying this, I'm also thinking it's not essential. I mean, it's not like the trouble is, obviously, authors these days, the requirement can be that they have to be all singing, all dancing, and able to promote as well. It's incredibly useful if you can. It really is. It's fantastic if people are keen to do school visits, keen to engage with librarians and perhaps talk on panels or conferences and things like that, and that can be really fantastic to do, and obviously that is what engages people and engages readers, and for a smaller outfit like me, that's essential in many ways. Not everybody can do it, but everyone can will bring something. So even if it's doing, you know, videos for YouTubes of draw-alongs because you're an illustrator, or just engaging in those kind of connective sort of activities with the readers and with the gatekeepers as well, who are the retailers, obviously, and the schools and librarians in my case.
Yeah, great. Kirsty, have you any tips along those lines for authors about how they can best support a publisher?
Well, I think Bella has said it all really. I think it is tough to expect authors to do all the social media and do all the, and have time to write and have, I think it's very hard. And I think particularly recently with the lockdown, we published books in January, and authors have suddenly had to pivot from what they were planning on doing to doing everything remotely and making videos. And not everyone likes having a camera stuck in their face and they have to perform to nobody. It's very challenging, I think. So I think publishers like to think that when they take an author on, they will engage with the process, because I think authors can't be invisible anymore. But I don't think anyone would expect them to have, to sort of Joe Wicks their Instagram and do constantly on social media. And you find people come and go. They're not on Twitter all the time, and then suddenly they'll have a little splurge and then they'll go away again. But I do think, I think from a support point of view, I do see lots of authors on Twitter in particular really supporting each other's books and each other's writing. And I think that's really helpful. And I think teachers love to see that. Bookshops really like it as well. And it's a community thing that I think at the moment is a really positive thing.
Yeah. Great. Emma, any further thoughts on that topic?
I think agree with everything that's all been said. It's fantastic if as an author you can help in some way. It used to be, before social media, it had to be the school's route, and not everyone is up to facing a classroom of children, particularly if the teacher decides to leave them at the same time. And that's a skill in itself. I think there are advantages now with social media. You can do it from your desk. You don't have to be out. You don't have to spend hours on the road to waste a day of your writing time to go to a school event with 20 children who haven't been prepared. So I think there are really advantages that you can take in terms of just helping talk about books in general, not just your own. It's not a selling thing necessarily, but talk about books, being supportive of other authors. And something about this pandemic, I think, a positive to be taken is that there are ways of doing events virtually that, once we all get used to it a little bit, may actually be really handy. So you are not spending your time traveling, spending a night in a hotel the day before, whatever it is that it might be. You can get to schools and engage with kids in a way that you couldn't do before. I think there are some positives to be taken that one can be done from home, which is a good thing.
Great. Lovely, thank you. I'm just looking at the further questions. We've covered some of these points, I think. Sorry, writers, of course. The book will be. Does size play a role in the marketing success of a book? The size of a publisher. Writers, of course, wonder how successful their publisher's marketing of their book will be. Yes, the idea that, often, how able are you as publishers to respond to authors' ideas about marketing and publishing? For instance, if an author says, "Look, I've got this brilliant contact," or if I do this video, or are you able to use it and make effective use of it in terms of generating sales? I'm just wondering how much that is an issue. It's probably much less of an issue for you, Bella, because you and your team are can have that conversation directly. But I think
we can. Obviously, I think that what we don't have is, if you've got an A-list, we haven't got the marketing heft of the big publishers, and I'm not going to have that certainly not at the moment. So the marketing, you know, if somebody said, you know, I want to put a billboard up there or whatever, I'd have to say no. Unfortunately, you know, the budget doesn't cover that. But what we can do is be inventive and more nimble in some ways, and do something that's perhaps a little bit unexpected. But we do have to look at it in different ways. We just simply haven't got the size to back up any big ideas. But I'm glad to say none of the authors who come into Guppy are expecting that. Something quite different. So, you know, one day I hope we will have more budget to put behind, and I hope that it'll be a more long-term thing. And that's what we have to do is be more long-term rather than you know, throwing it all in 1 month or 2 months. So, but yes, in terms of unusual things, we can make a decision obviously very quickly.
Yeah. Emma, from a bigger publisher's point of view, I mean, how do you cope, or how do you manage when an author comes up with a bunch of ideas that you then have to kind of persuade or put to a marketing department to enact?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I mean, whatever size publisher you've got, the resource is never unlimited. It's fact, you know, that's just the case. So I think there will be, we've had situations, we've got authors who are brilliantly creative and have loads of ideas, and that's fantastic. And we usually have it's best to be honest, I think, either to say, perhaps, well, I'm afraid we don't have the budget for that, or we're using the budget this way because we think it's a better strategic use of the money for your book. And we've had a lot of conversations, for example, about launch parties, which used to be, you know, the sort of gold standard for, you know, if your publisher's putting something behind it. But what it usually happened was, you know, all the friends and all your lovely friends and family, all the author's lovely friends and family would come, and people who are local to that specific bookshop. And a few books were sold, but not to really extending the circle. And actually, we've had a lot of conversations, even before the pandemic happened, about it's not worth spending the money, it's not the best use of money. It's a lovely event, but it's not the best use of money. And actually, you could put it better sort of seeding out to librarians, or, you know, specialized bloggers or something. There's different ways of doing it. And I think these honest, we have them quite a lot. We have them quite a lot, these conversations. And I used to be a bit scared of them, and I still am a little bit. But I think it's the best outcome always is to be honest and say why. Not just no, we don't have the budget. It's no, we don't think this is the best use because we think it's better. We're doing this, and we think this will do better for your book. And I suppose that's the experience of being published by a publisher as opposed to being self-published. You know, sort of all of us, between us, we have lots of experience, and the people we work with have lots of experience. And so that's in a way why you're coming to us as publishers to help you, guide the book. Yeah, but it can be difficult conversations, but hopefully honest conversations.
Yeah, great. Kirsty, do you have a take on that issue? I mean, do you have those difficult conversations too with?
Well, yes. I think everyone wants to have, you know, I think everyone sort of sees big marketing spend equals big sales, but actually I'm not sure that is always true. You know, there are lots of things that you can do. I think it's better to spend the money more wisely than splurge on something like the side of a bus or something. It's not always that simple.
I mean, is it the case, do you think, that there's a perception that perhaps a big poster campaign or a sort of public awareness?
So we do.
Sorry, I think we're breaking up a little bit. But I was just going to say, there's sometimes an awareness that a big campaign will sell a lot of books, but is that necessarily the case? You know, that actually, you know, just because an author is sort of everywhere on social media, do people necessarily go and buy their books just because, you know, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that,
No, well, in my experience, I don't think it is always true. I think marketing is always a bit of it's as risky as everything else, you know. It's just sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Something that's big on Twitter doesn't necessarily mean it's selling particularly well. You know, there's a lot of smoke.
Great.
I think you're better off thinking that your publisher's making interesting suggestions for how to do stuff, and that doesn't necessarily mean big spend. You know, it doesn't. You know, you can do lots of things, especially now with digital things. You can do lots of interesting things, and you can get reach without needing to spend too much money.
Yeah. That's a lovely point to finish on,
Yeah,
Kirsty. Thank you. I think it was really helpful. And Jane has reappeared.
I've popped up, yes, as the gatekeeper of time here, and before the techno gremlins take over completely, because they're beginning to circle, to say thank you ever so much. That was absolutely fascinating. Really, really interesting stuff there, and did exactly what I hoped when I suggested this to Maurice. It's been superb, so thank you very much, Maurice, for setting that up, and thank you, Bella and Kirsty and Emma, for your insights there. It's been superb. And just to say to the audience that you can use the same link you used to come into this, you can use it to access the recording. Give it 5 minutes and you will be able to access the recording. You'll be able to look at the questions and see what's been answered in type-wise, and scroll back through the chat to any of the links that have been put in there or information that you have provided for each other. And a last plug for 7 Stories. They are very worth donating to if you possibly can. So yes, once again, thank you very much to Maurice and our fabulous panel of publishers, and I hope that the audience enjoys the rest of Honkference.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed, Jane. Cheerio, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
How do I get out?